I think coal has been called a forgotten fuel. And also in our world energy scenarios, we see coal as still as a mainstay of energy supply, specifically in many countries of the developing world. And in our opinion, coal is one of the big problem areas. It's very difficult not to use that much coal. Some time ago, we talked to senior Indian politicians, for example, and they said you need to be aware of three things. We will continue to grow. We have a lot of cheap coal in the country, and we will use it. We will have to use it. So definitely coal is one of the big issues going forward if you talk about CO2 abatement.
And I guess that poses a real challenge for policymakers involved in this particular process. What kind of solutions, what kind of strategies have the World Energy Council explored? Many people look towards 2050 in terms of working out strategies. So give us a sense about perhaps the different routes and avenues that countries could head down.
I mean, what we see in our scenarios is that we have a global problem called climate change, but that the solutions have to be very, very much regional in kind. So what works for Southeast Asia is not the same thing which works for Europe. So in Europe we have at the moment, in Central Europe, a big emphasis on photovoltaics, on wind, on tying in the new and volatile renewables into already existing power systems. In Asia, Africa, other parts of the world, we have a problem of giving access to people to energy. And sometimes that's actually combined with use of coal, because we need to balance a trilemma of environmental protection, energy security, as well as access to energy and affordable energy. So when we deal with areas where coal is for the next decades important for the energy balance of that particular country, we very much need to think about trying to decarbonize that energy supply by carbon capture and utilization, or carbon capture and sequestration, for example. There is a lot of emphasis which should be put on these type of technology solutions, or any other type of clean coal technologies. I mean, you can see the impact in the United States because of shale gas. They've closed down more than 160 coal-fired power stations, and now they've saved more CO2 than Europe since 2006. Another strategy which is incredibly important is to actually manage demand. We have focused a lot on managing supply, on bringing in renewables, but if we actually lose the battle on increasing demand, then the battle becomes that much harder. So managing demand is something which we tell people to take a closer look at, and to achieve an overall balance, to balance this trilemma. We can see that countries which are balanced find it easier to attract investment and to actually then finance new and cleaner solutions for energy technologies.
When you look at China in the past, I guess the past year, it seems that one of the main drivers towards the country maybe moving away from coal isn't necessarily cost or just its need for energy, but it's actually just the people on the ground don't want to be walking around cities which are filthy. To what extent, and I mean filthy in the air, to what extent do you guys see, that kind of consumer-driven change influencing governments?
Actually, that one I would call the voter-driven. Whilst in China, voter-driven is, of course, a misnomer. But if you walk through Beijing, you can clearly feel the pollution in the air. And if you read the local newspapers, you will see that young couples actually say, I don't want to bring up my children in a polluted air like that. So undoubtedly, China is driven in the industrialized provinces by air pollution. However, if you talk to the government, what they have done is they've lifted 400 million people out of poverty. And in order to do that, they actually used a lot of coal. Now they got another 400 million to go. And whilst China is the country which invests more money than anybody else already in renewables, it still has a lot of new coal coming on stream. And when they stretch themselves to try and reduce coal, I think they will do that. They will do that for the obvious reasons you mentioned. However, I think they still will have 30-40% of coal in the system by 2050, which for the world means a lot of coal in the system.
Can you run me through some scenarios that might see the world avoid the 2-degree target? What could we be looking at in terms of emission peaks? Many people say emissions have to peak this decade to avoid 2 degrees, but give us a sense from, I know many people run different sort of trajectories. What are we looking at?
I think our trajectories will show that in our symphony scenario, which is a scenario where governments take very concerted action to combat climate change, we don't quite make the 2 degrees by 2050, but we actually achieve it in between 2060 and 2070. Now, 10 years can make a very, very big difference in terms of trajectory. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves, are we if we say 2050, is this too firm a deadline? Does it matter if it's 2057 or 2055? I think what we find difficult to judge is some of the new technology developments we'll get over the next 35 years. In scenario work, we only use technologies when we already can see weak signals in the system. But undoubtedly, in the next 3 to 4 decades, there will be new technologies coming up, which we don't see yet as a weak signal. And they might actually help us to achieve a steeper trajectory. So we use scenarios because we say the future is too uncertain to give forecasts. And if you believe in that, then actually I can tell you that at the moment I see a trajectory which will lead us to slightly post-2050 in achieving safe limits, but we could be off by 10, 15 years just by new technology breakthroughs, which we don't know about yet.
How would you compare the renewable energy sector now, I guess 2 years before governments might sign a deal in 2015 to 2007 ahead of Copenhagen? What are the main differences? Are there more things which you, if you were hoping to invest and back renewable energy more, are there more things you'd be confident about?
Well, undoubtedly the renewable sector has changed a lot. It has been, depending on where you are in the world, it has substantially increased in volume. And it has become much stronger in actually having a voice. Not always to a positive advantage, mind you. If you look at Germany, for example, the renewables sector is as powerful a lobbying group as fossil industry or car industry used to be. I would say that in many ways, what we thought in 2007, that's a main, I think, difference as well. In 2007, we thought that renewables would undoubtedly lead us to a much more decentralized way of energy supply. Whilst some of the experiences in Europe would also show us that yes, you have decentralized private renewables, but you also have very, very big centralized renewable stations like wind farms and industrial-sized photovoltaics. So I would say that what has changed is that this decentralization angle hasn't materialized as I would have expected it in 2007. Secondly, what's still the same is actually the difficulty in getting financing for renewables. So we haven't been able to break through some of these barriers of making renewables a lot more profitable than they used to be. The costs have come down significantly of putting into place renewable equipment. But we are now faced with a lot more system costs like integration into power grids, which we didn't know about, quite frankly, in 2007.
I mean, the costs of solar have seem to have plummeted in the past few years. When you look at the solar industry, many people say that if there was heavy investment, I think what Sir David King called another Manhattan project, you could. It might be the only way of really, cutting emissions radically. Is there any one particular form of renewables which you think, with more investment, could really sort of break the back of the fossil fuel industry, or at least not break the back of it, but break countries' heavy reliance on it?
I think the absolute Manhattan project, in my opinion, would be storage technology. The system costs which now are popping up, which hurt renewables, is actually the fact that we have to deal with the volatility in the system, and that grids become a lot more unstable when we have larger percentages of volatile renewables in the system. In order to overcome that, what you really need is a breakthrough in energy storage. And I'm not talking making lithium-ion batteries better. I'm talking about something fundamentally new, which allows it to store electricity generated at peak hours of photovoltaic and wind generation. If that happens, if such a breakthrough comes true, and if we can see that it can be applied in large scale, then fossil fuels will go out of business in many areas, in many sectors, within 2 decades.
Just on energy storage, I mean, we've had people on this platform in the past week talking about heating up huge blocks of iron. There was one chap talking about heating sort of thermal concrete. Didn't really understand it, and there's obviously the more traditional ones where you pump water up during the day when you have energy and let it flow back down through hydro generators. Give us a sense, and you've mentioned batteries. What forms of storage are showing most promise at the moment?
I think the batteries, the ones we know about at the moment, they help us to shave off peak hours and things like that. Now, they have a potential, I don't know, 20, 40%, 60% improvement, but it's not this discontinuity of a complete new level of performance. Now, pump storage, again, it helps us to equalize some of the problems, but it's not enough. It's far not enough in the Alps or even in Norway to solve and displace all of the fossil fuels. What I know that people are working on are completely new things, like generating hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, which is a very standard procedure if you have surplus energy from renewables, and then mixing that up with liquidized metal hydroxides, and actually generating solids out of that, solids which have a lot of energy in form of hydrogen stored. Now, I don't know if that ever will get from the lab into the field and what the economics of processes like that would be. But it's just an example that we have to start looking into very, very different types of technologies in order to solve energy storage. So for me, if I was a government, that would be the Manhattan project, not the photovoltaic cells, not the windmills. I think we can trust the market to further develop those, but it's storage which will make or break the large-scale share of renewables in energy systems.
Okay, final question. You mentioned demand earlier on, and when we think about energy efficiency, which the I shouldn't mention them, but the IEA said was one of the world's hidden fuels. How do you make energy efficiency sexy? Because it's something that everyone keeps on talking about, and there seem to be projects. The UK has its Green Deal project for domestic households energy efficiency. Can you point to any schemes around the world which you'd say, look, they've actually got that right?
Well, everybody thought it was sexy because they were also called. It was also called the low-hanging fruit energy efficiency. The negative megajoules, so the ones you save, are the ones you can earn a lot of money on. In reality, we see that we're finding it extremely difficult to get it. It's one target which in Europe we're not managing to meet. So it can't be that low-hanging, and it definitely isn't that sexy. Now, the things you need to keep in mind is that consumers do not like to have energy efficiency if it reduces their comfort. So the number one rule has to be that when you introduce energy efficiency, the comfort level for consumers has to be the same, or they won't do it. Now, I think what's the key to understand with energy efficiency is that why it's so difficult to get. It's because not one single stakeholder can get it. In order to get energy efficiency, several stakeholders need to work together. The consumer, the regulator, the energy provider. So you have at least 3 stakeholders which need to work together to make this target realistic. So when you say what are the successful schemes, you come to areas where this cooperation between different stakeholders has actually worked, and where you have a system where it's not only governments saying we need an energy efficiency target, but then stop there, but where they have gone a little bit further and actually work together with the consumers. And believe it or not, very often you find it in very small communities, villages or small cities, where they have started in schools to start talking about energy efficiency. Then the children have brought that home into their households. Their parents got involved, and then the parents put pressure on the politicians and on businesses to do something about that. And these are actually the cases where energy efficiency has worked and energy savings have worked.